Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is Kitty and I'm an academic junior doctor working in the UK. Today we'll be continuing the CV Building for Medical Students series, focusing on the value of intercalated degrees. So should you or should you not intercalate? This is a question that is really common amongst medical students. But is it actually right for you? What even is the value of an intercalated degree? And how much of a disadvantage are you at if you don't intercalate? Now, I'm personally someone who didn't intercalate whilst in medical school for a variety of reasons which I will go into later, but I'll try and keep this video relatively unbiased because I do believe there are plenty of reasons why you should intercalate, and I'll back this up with evidence as I go along. In this video, I'll first briefly cover what is an intercalated degree and what you can expect to get out of it. Then I'll explore the reasons why intercalation is a good idea, as well as reasons why it's not necessarily for you. But first, let's do an upfront summary for those of you who are too busy to watch the rest of this video. So, should you intercalate or not? Of course, no one can make this decision for you, but I think the bottom line here is that do it if you've identified an area of interest that you're passionate about or want to learn more about, which will be relevant to your career and learning needs. But don't do it for the sake of just getting some extra letters behind your name, if you're not interested in the subject, if you're not passionate about the topic, or if money is a big concern for you at this stage. And a key point to remember is that ultimately not intercalating is not going to stop you from being a clinical academic, nor is it going to stop you from pursuing your career of choice, or even pursuing a higher degree at a later point in your career. So firstly, let's cover what is an intercalated degree. An intercalated degree is 1 year on top of your 5-year medical degree. During this time, you're basically suspended from your medical school curriculum in order to study another undergraduate or postgraduate degree. For some medical schools, this is compulsory, but for many others, it is optional. You can undertake an intercalated bachelor's degree anytime after your 2nd year of medical school, whilst an intercalated master's degree can only be taken after the 3rd year of medical school. An intercalated degree will usually comprise of some formal teaching on research methodology as well as the topic of your degree, followed by some dedicated time to work on your dissertation. If you're particularly interested in academia, you may also consider a Master's of Research or an MRes, which is usually in a topic of your own choice. If you're really ambitious, I do know 2 people who've done a PhD as part of their medical school years, but as far as I know, this was organised entirely by themselves rather than as a routine or common offering. From what I understand, you would do a PhD in the middle of your medical school years, essentially taking 3 years out to do your research thesis, and then completing your medical school clinical years after that, bringing the total years of study to 8 years or more. So now let's look at the reasons why you should do an intercalated degree. Now, speaking to others and looking online, the main reasons that people tend to cite for doing an intercalated degree include spending time on a subject that you have a particular interest in and looking into a career in that specialty, being able to network with experts in the field of your interest, opportunity to build a stronger academic CV which you might struggle to get otherwise if you didn't intercalate, scoring better in postgraduate interviews and selections such as the foundation school ranking as well as specialty training beyond, an opportunity to experience life outside of medical school and make new friends and contacts, and finally, working on something outside of medicine to recharge your batteries before you finish your final years of study. But these are really more anecdotal stories, so let's actually look at the evidence base that supports intercalating. So firstly, in general, intercalated degrees offer more opportunity to build an academically strong CV compared to non-intercalated students. In a questionnaire of around 1,500 students that was published in BMJ Open, the authors found that those who intercalated and had a clinical academic supervisor tend to have more posters and publications output compared to those who did not. A friend of mine once described his decision to intercalate as buying himself a year's time to build his portfolio. And indeed, you do get a lot more time and effort to spend in research or academic output if that's what you want. Because 1, you'll have more research time allocated to that medical school year compared to your peers who are doing the normal curriculum. And also you have an extra year as a student to work on this, whereas your peers might graduate a year earlier than you and have to work a full-time job as a clinical doctor, which limits your time significantly more. Secondly, the evidence suggests that intercalated students will generally score more on their application for the foundation program compared to those who did not. So as of 2020 and 2021, according to the UK PFO, depending on what type of intercalated degree you did, you can score up to an extra 4 points on your foundation program application. Add to that, as we discussed earlier, you're more likely to get more academic achievements in forms of a publication, for example, so that's another extra point that you can get. And these cumulatively can make a big difference to where you get placed place in the UK. In another retrospective cohort study of 1,158 students, the study found that students who intercalated generally had a higher foundation application score, a higher academic quartile score, and improved success with securing their first choice foundation score compared to those who did not intercalate. For the academic foundation program, or the AFP, each deanery will have a different ranking process that is unfortunately not transparent to us. But generally, from speaking to various deanery directors, I gather that it makes up about 5% of your total points if you have intercalated versus if you didn't. There is also evidence that intercalated graduates are more likely to pursue an academic clinical career compared to those who didn't intercalate. However, there is a huge confounding factor here where people who are interested in academia are more likely to apply to a BSc in the first place, and the sample size of this study is relatively small and is only confined to one subject, so I would interpret that with a little bit of grain of salt. And finally, there's also some evidence that students who have intercalated tend to score a bit higher in their medical school exams. In a retrospective cohort studies, or around 860 students in Scotland, they found that after adjusting for cohort age, maturity, and baseline performance in Year 3, students who intercalated tend to score a higher mark in Year 4 and Year 5 exams. So that all sounds like really compelling reasons to intercalate, right? But the key thing to remember here is that the statistics are just that. It is a representation of how previous year students have done, but it doesn't actually have any bearing of how you will do in your personal case. What these numbers tells us is that yes, you'll probably have a higher chance of scoring higher in your later years in medical school, you'll probably have a higher ranking in your foundation program application, and you'll probably have more opportunity to build your CV. But none of this is a guarantee. And you can easily have a student who didn't intercalate, who's really motivated and did lots of extra stuff on the side in their own time, who will probably get more out of his medical school years compared to someone who did intercalate but actually just went along and didn't do anything extra. And of course there's outliers in every trend. And so here's the flip side of the argument that I present to you about why you shouldn't intercalate and why it's not necessarily for you. Broadly, I've split this into 3 parts, which is the socio-economic drawbacks of intercalating, the fact that not intercalating is not going to limit your future potential and your career choices, and lastly, there are other options for achieving higher degrees outside of intercalating whilst at medical school. So firstly, let's talk about the main cons of doing an intercalated degree. In a questionnaire by Jamie Nicholson on 300 medical students on why they didn't choose to intercalate, the main reason students cited was that they did not want an extra year of study and they did not want the financial burden of that extra year. And indeed, the socio-economic impact of doing another year of intercalation should not be taken lightly. An extra year of studying, while it sounds perfectly innocuous on its own, can actually have very significant financial implications. University tuition is £9,000 a year if not more, and whilst the NHS bursary might supplement you for an extra year, so year 4 and 5 of medical school rather than just year 5, this still means taking student loans to cover living costs for the year. If you are a non-UK citizen or an international student like me, then the fees are even more ludicrous. In addition to an extra year of living costs, you're also losing out on earning potential. Your colleagues who graduate a year earlier of you will already be making an F1 salary whilst you're accumulating even more debt. So for me personally, especially since I was paying international fees, at the time I didn't find a subject that was interesting enough that would make sense to me to give up the time and effort that was needed to get an intercalated degree. There are also social downsides to intercalating and prolonging your training by a year. Some of your friends might not intercalate and they might move on to the next year, which can have significant implications on your social circle and your support network. And ultimately, when you graduate, you will then be in the same stage of training as colleagues who may be younger than you. And all of these financial and social drawbacks might be really tedious if you don't enjoy the topic that you're signing up for. Now, my second argument for not intercalating is that it's not actually going to stop you from doing anything. You can still get additional achievements in your own time during medical school, you're still going to be able to get into your career of choice, and you're still going to be able to get into clinical academia if that's what you want to do. I feel like people often exaggerate on the things that you miss out on when you don't intercalate, but actually, if you look at what you can or can't do, short of getting a few extra letters after your name, the rest of the so-called CV building that you get during your intercalated year you can do in your own time absolutely. If you've watched my other videos in the CV Building for Medical Students series, you will know that despite not intercalating, I've managed to get involved in research projects and learn research methodology by networking on my own and contacting consultants to get involved. I've got publications in my area of interest with prominent academics in the field in the peer-reviewed journal. I was able to present nationally and internationally and won some prizes. I was part of a national trainee society in my specialty of interest, and I got into my first choice academic foundation post. But of course, the cost of all my achievements was that I had to spend a lot of time and working really hard alongside the medical curriculum to get all these achievements. Now, I unfortunately can't find a statistic for the percentage of trainees entering specialty training who do or do not have an intercalated degree and what their success rate was when they do their interview, but I think the same idea applies from foundation training to specialty training to consultancy. Looking at the core surgical training portfolio checklist, for example, having an additional degree is going to maximally score you an extra 4 points out of 72, which works to about 5.5% of your total mark. Now, as far as I understand, usually the kind of average mark that people would be getting would be around 30 to 40 points out of 72. So, on the one hand, having those extra 4 points might edge you ahead compared to another candidate, but on the other hand, if you didn't intercalate, it's not the end of the world. You have plenty of other domains to make up for those points. And the third and final part of my argument for not intercalating is that it is not the only way for you to get an additional degree. One of the qualms I personally had about an intercalated degree was that at the time, I couldn't find a BSc or an MSc that suited me well, that interested me enough, again, for me to put in that exorbitant amount of money and time into it. And I also knew that there were other postgraduate avenues for me to get an additional degree in an area that interests me. For example, the Edinburgh Surgical Master's degree, which can be done online via distant learning, and it's also a hell of a lot more cheaper. And there's also plenty of opportunity for you to take time out of your training to do an additional higher degree like an MD or PhD later down the line as well. So in summary, choosing to intercalate or not is ultimately going to be a very personal decision that you have to make for yourself. Hopefully, I've laid out some clear evidence for why you should or shouldn't intercalate with some evidence to back up both choices. If I were to go back in time, would I do an intercalated degree? I'd probably consider a master's in research because then I could set my own topic and choose my own supervisor, which would then, fit into what I want to do. But at the same time, I consider myself really lucky to have gotten the AFP post that I wanted. I have a good CV that I'm still building on, and I intend to keep going as an academic clinician. So I really have no regrets about not intercalating, and I think that was the right choice for me at the time. So that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you have found this useful. If you have any questions, please do leave them in the comments section below and I'll try and get through them. Remember to like the video and subscribe so that you get notified when the next video comes out. That's it for now, and I'll see you next time.